Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I'm going to get creative with wax seals. I have this new Holiday Magic wax seals collection from Spellbinders. There are these frames wax seals that have coordinating dies to do inserts in them, which I love that feature. Then we have the Postage Stamps 3D embossing folder with dies in them so you can cut out the frame as well as emboss. And then I use the inner frames to die cut some printed papers to put inside. Now these embossing folders have a little kind of well in them to put that die in when you're die cutting. There's one for the outside die. There's not really one for the inside die. When I was doing them, I didn't want to cut out the inside anyway, so I didn't worry about that. I only cut out the outside. I like having that cardstock in the back to glue the printed papers to. And then we have 3 new wax seals or mini wax seals here that I'm going to be using. We have the Snowflake, the Star, and For You. So before doing any card making, I like to make a bunch of wax seals at once, so I have a lot to choose from when I'm creating. So I'm starting off with my wax seal starter kit here. It has everything you need to get going. I have a bunch of wax beads. I'm just using the silver wax beads for this. I want all of my wax seals to be silver. So I have that off to the side, and I will just keep adding some to my little melting pot there as I'm working. I use a toothpick to mix up the wax seals while I'm working to make sure that everything is completely melted. Now, this is the first way I'm doing it, pouring it with my right hand, pushing that seal into the wax with my left hand. I highly don't recommend this. That first seal there, my hand was right above the flame and it was quite hot. So you'll see after this, I change it up and I will be pouring it with my left hand and putting that seal in with my right hand, which ends up working better because I'm right-handed anyway, so I have a little bit more control. One of the things that I love about wax seals is if one turns out that I don't really like and I know I'm never going to use it, I can put it right back in that melting pot and melt it. So there's very little waste when it comes to wax seals, and it works out perfect. Anytime I have extra seals, I just store them in with my wax seals, and if I end up not using them, I can just remelt them and turn them into something else. So as I'm creating, I will put some to the side that I think I will be using. I always create more than I end up needing because of the fact that I like choice when I'm creating. So I like to have more than I think I need. The 2 oval frame wax seals that I create at first, I end up remelting them because I think I want to have the ridge around them, but I changed my mind. I end up deciding to trim them. So those ones would have been just fine because of the fact that I trim them. When it comes to the rectangle frames wax seal, I don't like the ridge around the outside anyway, so it was a good thing that I made that choice to trim them, and I just use my detail scissors for trimming them. But I always like to just keep going till I know I have ones that I absolutely love for creating. So when I'm using these wax seals, it does take a tiny little bit to get used to how much wax to pour because a lot of the seals now are different sizes. You can't really plan on just doing the same amount for all of them. I want to have a nice ridge around the outside of those small ones, but I don't want to have a ton of excess wax. It's not going to work for the ideas that I have in my head. So I just keep going until I have ones that I like. And I love the fact that doing the wax seals give me the freedom to do that. I can keep doing them. And they cool down quite quickly. Even though that wax is hot, the stamp itself is metal. So the stamp itself stays cool. So it cools down that wax really quite quickly. Now I have a piece of paper towel off to my side. So after I've poured, I will often just kind of clean off the bottom of that little melting pot because that wax will drip down the side. It will drip onto the flame and then you'll get a little bit of smoke. So in order to prevent that, it's great to have a piece of paper towel just to clean off that and eliminate any of that. So this is the point where I decided I just was going to trim them down. It's really easy to cut the wax. I just use my detail scissors, but they cut like a dream. It's not really much different than cutting cardstock. And for the idea that I have with these, it just looks a little bit neater. I wanted to make those look like ornaments on a tree, so I just really liked the look of them trimmed down. And even though that outside part has a bit of a scallop to it, I just trim it with a straight edge. I don't trim super detailed within that scallop. So you can get as detailed as you want or just be very simple with it. So as I'm melting the other pieces, I will just use those detail scissors also to make them smaller, because of the fact that I want to make sure that I don't have wax pieces sitting out of that little melting pot piece there. Any of the pieces that I decide not to melt back down, I will just put in my little organizer with my wax pieces. I can melt them down in the future. As soon as I have enough pieces for creating what I want, I tend to stop. There's no point in doing extra. However, I will take the wax that's in the melting pot. I will use my silicone tools to completely clean out that wax. Any of that wax that dries on that silicone spatula just gets peeled right off and then put in with my wax. Now I had a little bit of ash and soot on the back of my little melting pot, so you can see that I got some on my hands. That's what all that black was. It's not actually ink, it's just some of that soot. Easy enough to wash off screen. Now for my snowflake mini wax seal, I wanted that snowflake to pop just a little bit more. So I used a white Posca marker just to bring out that detail and then set that aside to completely dry. For my mini star as well as my mini snowflake, I wanted to create some very simple foiled backgrounds for them. So I have two different foil plates. I have this Snowfall Shimmer here, and I'm foiling them with some Prism glimmer foil. I'm doing it on hammermill cardstock. And then for the star one, I'm going to be using the Falling Stars press plate. So I put it on my glimmer machine. Once it's hot, put the Prism foil with the pretty side against the plate, and then put my hammermill cardstock on there, put the plates on top, press my timer button, and once that timer button has gone off, I put it through my Platinum 6 machine. You need both the heat from the glimmer machine as well as the pressure from your die cutting machine. Once I'm done that one, I'm going to do the Falling Stars one, same process. And then once I'm done that one, I like to also use my solid hot foil plate to foil the excess. It's much easier to store excess foiled pieces on cardstock than those excess foil pieces. However, I do end up using them in these cards. I use them as mats or frames around my foiled images. So I will use them in different ways, but again, I always do it while I have my glimmer machine hot. I always do the solid hot foiling. So I do let my solid, it doesn't look like it, but I do let my solid plate get hot on my machine first before I put that excess foil on there. And again, I'm doing it on hammermill cardstock. Put my top plates on, press the timer button, and once that's done, I put it through my die cutting machine for the pressure. And here we have a gorgeous foiled background. Now you can see why I would use that as a mat. It's really quite in your face. So to me, for a background, it's a little bit too much, but for a mat to frame something, it works perfect. And because I'm going to be using the stars one to frame the stars, it coordinates with it. And the snowflake one I will be using to frame the snowflake, so it coordinates with that as well. So the same process with the snowflake one, put it on my plate, put the cardstock on top of it, and then once the timer button has gone off, put it through my die cutting machine, and we are done our foiling. So we have all our pieces ready to go. Now that Falling Stars press plate has a coordinating embossing folder called Wishing Stars, and on the back of the packaging for the Falling Stars press plate, it shows you how to place it in that embossing folder. I've used this set before, and when I first used it, I didn't realize that it had to be rotated to be put in the embossing folder, so I had a little bit of a challenging time to it, then realized the instructions were right in the press plate packaging. So if you have that same issue, it's a really easy solution. You want to rotate it and put it towards the bottom of your embossing folder. Once I have that embossed, I can trim my pieces down. My solid hot foil piece is trimmed to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. My foiled and embossed star piece is trimmed to 3 3/4 by 5 inches. I have some stars die cut from the Essential Stars die set, and as I'm looking at them, I'm realizing that my smallest star is a little bit too small. My wax seal is going to cover it, so off screen I recut it. I have some matte silver foil from the Silver Treasure cardstock pack for one of the stars, and I have some glitter foil or glitter cardstock from the Antique White Treasured cardstock pack for the larger star. And that white glitter has a little bit of silver specks in it, so it coordinates with the silver stars on my background here, as well as that silver cardstock. I wanted to do some simple ink blending on my background, so I started with tumbled glass and then did some broken china around the outside edge to frame it in. For a sentiment, I have this sentiment here from the Little Smile Sentiment press plate set. I don't remember the exact sentiment, but it says something about the moon and stars, which works really well with that star background, the star die cuts, as well as my star seal. Now, when I was doing the star seals, I kept having a little bit of a ridge around one side. And I kept trying to fix it, kept trying to redo the star seal so that I would have an even ridge. And for some reason, I kept getting a wider ridge around one side. I gave up and decided to use the wax seal. And the funny thing is I actually like it better because it almost looks like a moon with a star because of that extra ridge. Suits the sentiment just a little bit more. Once I have my foiled pieces glued to my card base, I can glue down my sentiment, and then I can glue down my stars. Now, because I'm using some glitter cardstock as well as that silver cardstock, these specialty cardstocks take a little bit longer to dry, especially the glitter ones. They absolutely will dry with liquid glue, but they do take just a little bit longer because of that different surface. So I will let that dry for a little bit longer than I would let just regular cardstock dry. And then I use my Barely Art glue to glue that seal in the middle, making sure that that star lines up with my star die cuts to make it look like it goes together well. The glue that I'm using is Barely Art glue, and I use it in a fine line bottle, so it works well for assembling die cuts as well as gluing my cards together. I sat that star card aside to completely dry while working on my snowflake card. And the background for this is very similar to the star one. I start with some tumbled glass distress ink, then go in with some broken china and just do a heavier amount around the edges just to kind of frame it in. I always think when we're doing ink blending that it looks nicer when it's framed in just a little bit. To me, it just finishes it off. The distress ink will resist, or the foiling will resist the distress ink, and you will still see all of that gorgeous foiled snowflakes with that ink in the background. For the sentiment for this, I have some foiled sentiments done from the Merry Messages press plate set. These are ones that I did from previous cards that I had extras. I have some of them done with the prism foil, some of them solid hot foiled with the prism foil, and some of them heat embossed with silver embossing powder. So I will be using them on a lot of the cards in this video. They just worked perfectly, not only the sentiments themselves, but the foil that I had used as well as the silver embossing just worked perfectly. For an accent piece for this card, I'm using one of the snowflake stickers from the Merry Moments Snowflake collection. This goes with the Merry Moments holiday kit. There was some extra pieces that coordinated with it, and I've done a video with that kit and with the snowflakes, but this just worked really well as a focal point, as well as adding it on top of that foiled background with that snowflake wax seal in the center. It just finished it off really, really nicely. For the For You wax seal, I'm using it with some printed papers, and these printed papers are also from that Merry Moments kit. This is from the 6-inch paper pad. I have some die cuts cut from the Christmas foliage die set, and it works well with that printed paper. I have them die cut in colors that coordinate with it. The pieces are really, really easy to put together, and by using that liquid glue, it gives a little bit of wiggle room for assembling those pieces as well. When assembling the poinsettias, I like to use, or any flowers really, I like to use my fingers to kind of curve the petals. It gives them a little bit more of a natural shape to them. Then I use my glue to glue them together, as well as the center point to it. Set that aside to completely dry. For my background, I have a plaid paper from that Merry Moments 6-inch paper pad. To give it a little bit of extra shine, I'm using the splatter effects in the sparkle just to add a little bit of sparkle or splatter to that background. It's just going to catch the light and give that background just a little bit of a different look to it. This is a step that obviously you could omit if you want, but I really love the look of those splatters in the background on that printed paper, just something a little bit different. Then I'm ready to start assembling my card. I have some poppy cardstock for my mat. It's trimmed to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. My printed paper is trimmed to 3 3/4 inches by 5 inches. And you can see that I have a die cut out of the center of that poppy cardstock. That's where I die cut those poinsettias from. But once I have everything together, you're never going to know there was pieces die cut out of it. I do this often, especially with specialty cardstocks. It's just a way to extend your cardstock a little bit more. If something's going to cover it anyways, there's no reason not to do some die cutting below it. The only time I wouldn't do this is if the layer above was really, really thin, like say vellum. I would never do that because you'd obviously be able to see right through it and see that there was die cuts out of it. But most of the time it's cardstock going on top of it and it's fairly thick and it hides it. Here I'm using printed paper. It's not thick printed paper, it's fairly thin printed paper, but because I have all of my die cuts going right over top of it, you can't see that there's anything die cut out from underneath there. So again, it's a great way to extend your cardstock and make them go just a little bit further, especially those specialty cardstocks that tend to be a little bit more on the pricey side. So for my wax seal, I have a tag cut here from the Essential Tags die set, and I was going to put it kind of on top of the poinsettia, but I just didn't want to cover that up completely. So I put most of it below there. So I still have that tag sitting out. Then I add that For You wax seal kind of partly on that tag and partly on the poinsettia. So it is the focal point. You can see that it's not hidden in any way. Then I let that dry completely. And I just use my liquid glue to glue down those wax seals. There are wax seal stickers and I do have some, but because there were so many different sizes and shapes for the wax seals that I was using here, I decided to just use my glue for all of them. For my next card, this is where I'm using the frames wax seals with those frame little die cut inserts. I wanted them to look like ornaments on a tree. So I have the branches embossing folder here. I have some fern cardstock that I've taped to that embossing folder, and I'm using some pine needles distress ink to ink that embossing folder. This way my branches are just going to show up just a little bit more. Not so much that they take attention away from my wax seals, but enough that you can definitely see that they are branches and look like they're branches on a tree. So inking embossing folders, I tend to do it about 3 times depending on the look that I'm going for. I do it 3 times for this, but sometimes depending on the look that I'm going for, 1 time is enough. Sometimes I might need to do it 4 or 5 times. Again, depending on the look and depending on the coverage that my ink is getting. By using distress inks, it's really, really easy to come off of that embossing folder. I just rinse it in water. You don't even need any clean or anything. It just rinses right off. I have my fern cardstock here is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches. I always emboss first and then trim down later. Sometimes when you're embossing cardstock, it skews the measurements a little bit. So easiest to have a little bit larger piece and then trim down afterwards. So my poppy mat here is 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. I've trimmed down my embossed piece here to 3 3/4 inches by 5 inches. And when I'm gluing them down, I want to be a little bit liberal with the glue because of that embossing. I want to make sure that those recessed areas have good contact with the layer below. So I'll put them down and then I'll put my acrylic block on there just to hold that in place, make sure it's nice and flat. It also frees up my hands for working on other things. Then I can glue in the little insert pieces for my wax seals. Now these are die cut from one of the printed papers from that Merry Moments printed paper pack. Often when you have 6-inch paper packs, they're smaller prints. This one, it was just perfect. It worked well with those dies. This is the print there. So there's a lot of different images there. I did place my dies down and I taped them down with some Best Ever craft tape to make sure that they were going to stay in place, and then did my die cutting. And I chose 3 different objects. You can pick and choose whatever you like. I think this would also be really fun as frames on a wall. Like a couple months ago, there was a stitching die for the club that had an armchair and a lampshade. I think this would be a great little frame on a wall. That would be fun. And then I think over a year ago, there was the Friendship collection that had a hands with bracelet. This would also be nice as a little charm on that bracelet, a little something hanging down from that bracelet, or even say a necklace, pendant or whatever. So I think you could really have a lot of fun with some of the ways that you use these frames here. So I wanted them to be ornaments on a tree and I wanted them to hang with bows. So I just have some 1/8 inch silver ribbon here that I'm just tying into bows. I leave that ribbon on the spool and tie it off of there and then just trim the ends. So I don't cut pieces first and then make my bows. I do it while it's still on the spool and then I just cut that excess off. I have some more sentiments from that Merry Messages press plate and die set that I'm going to use with this one. It just says Merry and Bright, so it's going to work perfectly for a decorated tree. And then I pick and choose where I want those ornaments to go, using that liquid glue to glue them down. And then the last step is to add the ribbon bows on top. And I'm using that liquid glue to glue them as well. Being ribbon, they will take a little bit longer to dry. So what I typically will do is put a dot of glue or a glob of glue on the back of the bow or where I want that knot to sit. And then I will set that aside and just let that sit still to dry. You can see when I lift my card up here that that last bow that I put down starts to move. I hadn't let it sit long enough for that glue to really start setting. And as I said before, with specialty cardstocks, it takes a lot longer for liquid glue to dry. It absolutely does dry. That is even more so when it comes to ribbon. You want to be patient with it and you want to give it some time where you're not moving it. For my last two cards, I'm using that Postage Stamps embossing folder. I'm just using some fern cardstock here. I have the outer dies in there and I placed my pieces of cardstock in that embossing folder and then put them through the machine to do both that die cutting as well as that embossing all at once. And I love the look of those little pieces with the frames, with the embossing as well as the die cutting. I love it when there's embossing folders that have dies that inlay in them to do two at once. I think it creates really interesting and unique features. For the first card here, I have a combination of printed paper and cardstock, and I'm using the tree die set from the Christmas rocking chair die set to go in my little postage frame arch. I'm going to glue the different layers down to the base, and then for this card, I typically will do my die cuts outside or not on my card for my assembly. For this card, I actually do my assembly right on the card because there's not many layers to the tree, so I don't have to worry about possibly changing my mind later. I pick and choose which sentiment I think works best with this. Now, I chose to use some metallic cardstock from the Ruby Treasured cardstock pack for this particular card. I think it would show up a little bit better if I had, say, chosen some gold or silver cardstock or even some glitter cardstock, something that had a little bit of a different texture to it. Because the lights for this tree have a solid piece that go over top of it, and that solid piece is the same color as the tree, and then the background is red, I think you lose the lights just a tiny little bit. I add some glossy accents to them just to give them some more shine and more dimension and bring them out again. But I do think if I had chosen the same cardstock that I cut my star for the top of the tree that they would show up just a little bit better. Just a thought that I figured I would share with you while I was assembling it. I like it the way it is, but I do think they kind of blend in a little bit because I have red cardstock right behind it. So for some pieces, I do use my reverse tweezers to glue or to hold them while I'm adding glue to that. It just frees up my hands and makes sure I don't get glue on them. And it also means that my fingers aren't in my way when I'm assembling things and placing things where I want them to go. Especially with the tiny pieces, sometimes it's really hard to be able to see where those pieces are going. So after gluing that together and after that is set, I grab the glossy accents and just put that on top of the lights. Another option here would be to put some stickles on top of the lights, and then you would have that glitter with the ruby cardstock underneath as well. So once the stickles are on there, I will set those aside to dry. They won't take very long to dry because those little light die cuts are really, really tiny. For the last one here, I once again have a combination of solid cardstock and printed papers. Now I am using the gnome here from the Harvest Time die set. This is part of the Cuckoo Cottage collection, and I have another video that I created with that collection. I didn't use the gnome in that video, so I thought it'd be fun to create him as a Christmas gnome here. So I first glue down my poppy cardstock for my mat, my printed cardstock for my frame. I chose this printed cardstock because it kind of coordinates with the color that I die cut the base of the gnome. So you'll see that once I assemble the gnome, we really only see his nose, maybe a little bit of his arms once he's assembled. I typically don't use pinks when it comes to Christmas. So I try to, especially when there's a printed paper that has that pink in there, I try to incorporate it a little bit just to kind of get out of my comfort zone. Once I've glued down that rectangle postage stamp and the printed paper inside of it. And that printed paper is another one of the printed papers from that Merry Moments cardstock pack. Then I can glue my die cuts together. I'm going to start off with my mushrooms. They're just 2 pieces. They're really easy to assemble. The top of the mushrooms was die cut out of some poppy cardstock, and then the base of them is done with some alabaster cardstock, which is kind of an off-white cream color. Again, I'm using those reverse tweezers just to hold those die cuts in place. That way I can place them down just a little bit easier. When it comes to the gnome itself, I used some Bellini cardstock for the base of it. You're really only going to see his nose as well as a little bit of his arms once he's done. For his feet, I used some Raven cardstock, and again, you're only going to see his boots once his shirt is on there. The shirt and the hat were die cut out of some poppy cardstock. You can see how quick and easy these die cuts are to assemble together. For his beard, I used the glitter cardstock from the Antique White Treasured Cardstock pack. Just adds that extra little bit of texture to it. You could even use velvet cardstock here. I think that would be fun too. But because the printed papers as well as the cardstocks are kind of a matte finish, it's fun to add just a different texture. So I like the glitter cardstock for that, just a little bit of that different texture to it. So once I have all of those pieces together, I first glue in that gnome in the background and then add the mushrooms to the side. And I think those mushrooms with that gnome are just a fun accent to it. It's different for a Christmas card, and you can even do this easily as a fall card. These frames I think would be great for focal points on many different cards, especially for, you know, framing in some smaller die cuts that might get lost on a larger card. But with that embossing as well as die cutting, it's just the perfect frame. Here is the one with the Christmas tree, and that Christmas tree has the glossy accents on top of the lights. Really hard to see it catch the light on camera, but it does in person. It looks really, really pretty, and it adds just a little bit of extra texture to it. Then we have our frame wax seals made as Christmas ornaments on a branches embossed background. And I just love how those wax seals frame those little die cut pieces. I think they are a perfect combination together. Then our foliage card with the plaid background and the For You stamp. And that For You stamp just kind of pulls everything together between that silver sentiment as well as the silver sparkle splatter on the background. It just ties everything together there. Then our snowflake card, and I think this one might even be my favorite just because of its simplicity, but I really love that snowflake dimensional sticker with that snowflake seal in the center and then the snowflake background. And then our stars here. Now I did this more Christmassy, but you could easily do it for other occasions as well. And I think they would be fantastic that way. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate all the time that you spend with me. I hope you have a fantastic day.